This episode of the Plant Pod is sponsored by Pershore College. Pershore is a vibrant hub of learning nestled in the heart of Worcestershire, where education meets innovation in the fields of horticulture, animal welfare, and agriculture. At Pershore College, they understand that learning is a journey that goes beyond textbooks. Whether you're just starting your career or looking to enhance your skills, Pershore College offers a range of courses tailored to meet the needs of the modern professional. From state-of-the-art facilities to hands-on training in their stunning gardens and commercial nursery, students gain real-world experience under the guidance of expert instructors. But Pershore College isn't just about plants and animals, it's about growing people. It's about cultivating a community where students can thrive, with support and resources that extend well beyond the classroom. Their commitment to student success in a sustainable and innovative environment makes Pershore College the perfect place to plant your seeds for the future. So if you're ready to grow, to innovate, and to lead in an ever-evolving field of agriculture, animal science, and horticulture, then visit Pershore College online at www.wcuc.com/horticulture. Discover more about their programs and how you can become part of a community that's shaping the future of the natural world. Pershore College is where your future takes root. In this episode of the Plant Pod, I got to sit down and chat with Professor Roy Kennedy. Roy is the head of department for higher education at Warwickshire College and University Centre and the head of research and innovation based at Pershore College. Roy is a professor of microbial science, a fellow of the Royal Society of Biology, and a member of the Australian Society of Plant Pathology. Roy has worked all over the world, from Australia, India, Rothamsted, and the UK. I am lucky enough to say I get to have lectures with Roy on a weekly basis and get to study under him at Pershore College. I cannot thank Roy enough for giving up his time to sit down and chat with me. This is Season 2, Episode 5 of the Plant Pod. Let's get into it. Hello Roy, thank you for joining us here on the Plant Pod. Your time is really appreciated.
Hello Ross, great to see you, and thanks for inviting me on to today's podcast.
I'm looking forward to it. So what I like to do with the guests is, at the beginning I just like to do a little introduction. So for yourself, who are you, for the people that don't know you, and how did you get into horticulture and agritech?
Well, my name is Professor Roy Kennedy. I work here at Warwickshire College University Centre, but I've had a long pedigree in working in agriculture and horticulture going back to the 1980s, really. Yeah. So I started off doing my PhD at Sydney University. Before that, I was an undergraduate at Queen's University Belfast. I did a PhD at Sydney University, and then from there I came back to the UK because I got a scholarship for Sydney University, which meant I didn't have to pay the visa tax. If I didn't have a scholarship, I'd had to pay 30,000 Australian dollars per annum to actually go and study in Australia. But because I got a scholarship, I didn't have to do that. But one of the conditions of the scholarship was actually to leave Australia at the end of the time. So I had to come back to the UK, but I was actually had a job whenever I returned at the University of Reading, working on tomato diseases. So from there I went to Rothamsted, and then from there I got a job a full-time permanent job in Horticulture Research International, and I was responsible for work on vegetable diseases. And from there I went to, when horticulture Research International was taken over by Warwick University. I became a researcher in Warwick University. And from there, I went to Worcester University to become head of department and set up research there. And then the final part of my career has been to come to Warwickshire College University Centre and set up new courses in research here.
So I know you touched on it there, we've been in Australia, but you have a bachelor's in botany from the University of Belfast, a master's in mycology from the University of Sydney, and a PhD in plant pathology from the University of Sydney. But what made you study in different parts of the world?
Well, I'd always had an interest in tropical agriculture right from my early age, and the chance of going to Australia to look at different systems there was very inviting. I applied for a scholarship and was very lucky to get one. So that then paved the way for me to go to Australia and study in tropical agriculture, stroke horticulture. I did my PhD on citrus diseases.
Yeah.
And so I spent time in New South Wales working with the Department of Agriculture of New South Wales. They had a station in Gosford, which was north of Sydney, so I spent some time there. And the University of Sydney had an off-site station in the west of Sydney called the Plant Breeding Institute, where they did most of their rust research. So I was also stationed there and came to know a bit about agriculture and a bit about cereal diseases.
Yeah. What part of that did you like the most? Was there any in particular?
Well, I think it was, I have a background, I come from a farming background, so I think it was the fact that there was new systems that I'd never seen before, new crops, new ways of growing, new climate, new everything, new threats, although some of the threats over there are the same as some of the threats over here, particularly for cereal diseases. It was a completely new world. And then when you had the cicadas as well in the background, giving you that chorus, it all felt very exotic and very, very different from what I was used to.
And coming back over here, one of the highlights would be the weather.
Yes, of course, the weather. But I spent a long time working in glasshouse crops, so the weather doesn't really come into that. When I came back to do work on tomato diseases, I was working on Phytophthora nicotiana parasitica and Phytophthora cryptogea. So I feel that my whole idea at that time was really solving problems. There are lots of problems around. Pesticides have been used for a long time, but they weren't the solution. There was obviously problems with pesticides. It was at that time when new ideas and the organic movement was getting going. So there was new ideas, new possibilities, and we had a Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food at that time, which I think is very important for agriculture, that we have a dedicated government department that looks after food production. Food production can't be just left to market forces, otherwise it could go disastrously wrong. So at that time we had a Ministry of Food and Fisheries, so we were able to, they sponsored a lot of work, to keep production stabilized and also to change its direction. So through the ministry they were able to then move away from pesticides and move into alternative approaches. And I fear that something similar is going to be required now if we're going to move to a greener agenda. We can't just allow this to happen in a haphazard way. It has to be planned in a proper way, and it has to be underpinned by research and demonstrations that can show growers the benefits and also the profitability of making some of these moves. And as well as that, that will be good for the environment, good for growers, and will enable government objectives to be achieved, which is all something we all want. We all want a greener future. So I think that I was lucky in those days then that there was an overarching ministry that would look after technological changes and also guide those by looking at research or other things that could be done. But I fear now that we're in a situation where it's a little bit more precarious to make change. After all, we're then we're asking growers to make a risky decision which could put them out of business. So if it doesn't work for them or it's not properly handled. So that's one of the aspects where I was lucky at that time, and we had there were new techniques and new technologies to solve problems coming along. We were moving away from pesticides, and that was an important aspect in those days in the 90s.
Yeah. And you have hands-on experience commissioning and operating 3D vertical growing systems to do with agritech technology. Are they the way forward?
They are the way forward as long as you can get cheap energy.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. They are the way forward. So they also are very sustainable in that there's no waste. Everything is recirculated, nutrients, things like that. One of the problems that we've seen in the past in field-based agriculture is the over-application of nutrients, which is wasteful for growers to have to do that, to have to expend that money. It's also bad for the environment because a lot of it can be wasted and run away into rivers and into the land. So using technology that can do that is something that we must move forward on. And obviously 3D growing systems where you have concentrated production in an area where you don't have to have acres and acres of glasshouse. You can have that concentrated in a way that's good for the plants. It's been shown in papers anyway to be a more productive system, but underpinning all that is cheap energy or cheaper energy, which is
how do we get that? How do we get cheap energy?
Well, I think that that's a question that's difficult. I mean, we obviously have wind solutions and photocell solutions for that. Probably nuclear is is a major part for the future in that mix of cheap energy. I'm not saying ultra cheap energy. I'm just saying low emission energy. So it's something that we must use. We must use these kinds of new technologies. But after all, much of the horticultural production is produced in glasshouses in this country. So we've been using glasshouses for a long time. So enabling these glasshouses to be efficient and use less energy is probably something that we must move towards.
Yeah. And you were also involved in creating the Met Office pollen count. How involved were you?
Well, I wouldn't say I created it, but I was involved in running it for a while.
Yeah.
The Met Office pollen count is one of those things that is useful. In my time working, I've dabbled in crop systems, but I've also worked on animal systems. And this was one of those areas when I went to Worcester University where I was moving into human disease or human problems. Where I was carrying out research. So the pollen count was one of those. We had specific research projects on allergies, and so pollen is well known to be allergenic and causes many people discomfort, and also they have to take a lot of medicines to actually overcome their problems. And it's not only pollen, but it's also within the household. There's allergens that are released by dogs and cats, and many other animals as well. And so it can be something that's experienced outside during with a seasonal aspect, or it can be something that's inside all the time. So having information on pollen is definitely one of those things that can help people avoid periods or avoid circumstances where their reactions might be in some sort of elevated process. As far as pollen was concerned, I was always very interested in the allergen side of it, because pollen changes in its allergenicity. Early on in the season, pollen is less allergenic, whereas late in the season it's more allergenic. So one of the things that I was moving towards was actually measuring the allergen content and looking at what the amount of allergen that was present. So we did some research on that, funded by the European Union, which was very successful and showed this variation in the allergenic content of the pollen. So the pollen itself is a useful marker of whether people are going to have reactions, but that can be mediated by the amount of allergen that's present in the pollen.
So how can it be improved? Is it easy to improve, or will it take a lot of work?
I think the present system probably is too oriented. It's not mathematical enough in that it's not regional. It's not well, it is regional, but it depends on certain stations where they measure the pollen feeding into the overall system. So it depends where those stations are, where they're actually taking the measurements as to what will happen or what the outcome will be on a UK basis. Actually measuring the allergen might be something that could be very useful as well, and could provide more information for those people that suffer from allergenic reactions.
Do you know if they're working on that currently? Or?
I don't think they are. I think there was a period of time about 10 years ago where that was something that was very much to the fore. But I don't know, to be honest. I've moved on from those aspects.
So you also did research to create a crop side test to help keep fizz bubbling for longer in bottles of wine. This is something that my mum would love.
Yeah.
So how did that come about, and how does the test work?
Well, one of these things that I've been into for a long time, for at least 20 years, has been lateral flow tests. Of course, everybody knows about lateral flow tests now because they're used for COVID, or one of the things that have been used in COVID. But I was developing lateral flow tests that could measure pathogens in crops and in crop produce. So when I came to Warwickshire College University Centre, we applied for some Innovate grants, and we were supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation through their body, through their company, which is now called GADX, which was in those days called Mologic. This is about 6 or 7 years ago. So we got a partnership with them, and we also got a partnership with East Malling Research, which is probably the oldest research company, oldest research station in the world. And they were obviously very interested in strawberries and botrytis. We also had another partner, which was Berry Gardens, which were the biggest growers of strawberries in the UK. And all of these people came together to work on the grant. Initially, the application, we had to make an application for the grant. We had to compete with other applications, and we were lucky enough to actually win the award. So that enabled us to do some research to try and improve the diagnostics of botrytis on strawberry crops in particular. So we were working on detecting botrytis in strawberries, initially in air, but also in strawberry samples. So we were trying to ascertain whether how long the strawberries could be picked for and survive before the pathogen appeared, because botrytis is one of these endophytes. By an endophyte, I mean it's present in the plant. The plant looks as if it's completely free of disease, but the botrytis is growing in the tissues. So it's likely that there's a lot of botrytis around in the fruit itself. Some of that may be infected from flowers initially, but there may also be some that's already growing in the plant itself. We just don't know that, although maybe the main part may be that through flower infection, the fruits become infected as well. So we were looking at strawberries. We were trying to ascertain how long they could survive, and we were looking at other pathogens that affect strawberries, notably mucor and rhizopus. But the botrytis test, which we developed into a lateral flow format, was the most successful and the most accurate. So we went with that. And subsequently, after we developed it, we found that the grape industry took it up as well, because they were interested in looking at whether botrytis occurs in the extracts that they take from grapes after they're all sliced up, and they get the juice from the grape that goes to form wine. They examine that juice to find out whether it's actually called musk. They look at that to see how heavily contaminated it is with botrytis, and that depends on whether it's will depend on whether it's good quality or bad quality. The more botrytis, the more bad quality it is. The less botrytis, the better quality it is. So they took the test up and they looked at it and they used it. Previously, they were looking at spectrophotometer measurements to try and ascertain whether the juice, the stuff that went to make the wine, was good quality or not. And they switched over from that to looking at using the lateral flow test, and they've had very good results with it, and subsequently it's now used in the champagne industry, throughout the champagne growing industry in France, and also used in Australia as well.
So on top of the tests you did for them, you've also been innovative in creating tests for early onset of potato blight as well. You've had papers published about this. Why is it important to the agriculture industry?
Well, potato blight's obviously a massive crop in the UK. There's a lot of potatoes. Everybody goes down the chip shop and buys the potatoes. So that's they get the potatoes in one form or another. There's a lot of potatoes that are stored, and so there's a range of different problems that affect potatoes. But potato blight is one of the major ones. There's a lot of, up to about 9 to 10 sprays and during the season are applied to control potato blight. So that's a lot of spraying on the crop, a lot of chemical that's used. And so trying to produce systems or trying to produce tests that could reduce that amount of spraying is definitely one thing that we wanted to do. And again, we applied for an Innovate grant. We were lucky in that our grant was selected and chosen, and that involved developing. I was involved in the test development for lateral flow tests that could detect potato blight, and these could be used in tissue or they could be used in air samples. That would be a forecast kind of approach, detecting it in the air before it actually gets into the crop. So we had a range of different types of techniques that we were using to try and see if we could get better information on when to apply sprays, and also determine when to apply sprays early enough, because if you get early control of potato blight, you're more likely to use less sprays in controlling the disease, and in many cases you may be actually successful in largely stopping it, depending on the climate as well. So that was the idea behind it, but there were many other kind of approaches that we diseases that we worked on. One notable one was Parina Pisiza brassicae, which was light leaf spot in Scotland. Now, in Scotland, Perrina precisa affects the Brussels sprout crops, and Scotland is actually quite important as far as Brussels sprout production is concerned, because the crop is planted in May and it goes right through to March the following year. That's a long time in the field. It's under a lot of threat. And what was happening in the Brussels sprout crop was that light leaf spot was progressively developing. They were spraying against it, but it wasn't that successful. By Christmas time, many growers were throwing out 2/3 of the crop, because if there's a blemish on the Brussels sprout, nobody wants to buy it. So it has to be blemish free. So they're throwing out 2/3 of the crop, and that enabled them with 1/3 of the crop to supply their market needs. So, but that's an awful lot of production to throw away. So in fact, growers were growing 3 times the amount of crop that they needed. That's a lot of resources. It's a lot of fertilizer. It's a lot of material. It's a big waste problem. So by utilizing the tests that we developed for light leaf spot, and also using those tests to determine when to apply sprays, we were able to actually, with the right cultivars, keep the crop clean for the whole period. So in fact, the growers were able to grow the crop clean from planting date in May right through to March the following years, and didn't throw any crop out, which improved their costs of production, and also it reduced the amount of waste, and that was a big win-win for us in that system. But there's been other ones as well. We've worked on clubroot. We've introduced with Eurofins. We've introduced a test for clubroot, which involves determining the amount of resting spores for clubroot there are in soil samples. This is much more reliable than actually trying to detect clubroot in plants, because the normal test is to grow it up in plants, send the soil sample in, grow the plants in the soil sample, and then try and determine whether there's any clubroot on those plants. That's a long process. That involves growing plants and then looking for the symptoms and then testing the symptoms. It can be weeks before you get a result. But with the clubroot test that we developed, you could actually send the soil samples in and get the results back in a week, which fits in with the production cycle. They need the results very quickly. It was quantitative, so we knew how much clubroot there was there in the soil, and based on that we could either take action or advise growers not to grow crops or brassica crops in those fields affected, and we allied that with resistant cultivars and also applications like Limax, which seem to control clubroot and still give a yield. It's a fertilizer. Limax is a fertilizer, but it seems to have some other properties that might make it applicable to overcome clubroot in some way. Because clubroot is a very difficult disease to control. It affects weeds. It can move in water. So it's a real problem. But we're very proud to work with Eurofins and have a test at the end of it that could be applied for horticultural crops. And it was the first time that such a test had been, that type of test in soil samples had been offered by a commercial service provider.
In your opinion, will clubroot and blight ever be wiped out? Is there a way to get rid of it forever?
I don't think so. I think it'll always be there at some level. The fact that clubroot can infect weeds means it's very difficult to deal with. Yeah. It can occur on weeds and field margins. It can contaminate water samples. We've had growing crops and brassica crops in fields where there's been spring water, and the spring water contains clubroot coming out of it's always there.
Yeah.
Another aspect which makes it difficult in commercial cropping is the fact that volunteers are there. You may have a crop that's that can't be infected, but there's always volunteers in the soil which can come up that will be infected. So that helps overcome the genetic basis of control and can be problematical in trying to keep clubroot levels below those that cause economic damage.
Yeah, so why it's in the water still, you're never going to...
You're never going to get it. You're never going to get round of it. But certainly with things like light leaf spot or Paraenopasiza brassicae, we've reduced the overall level of it in Scotland to low levels. It's one of these colder diseases, so it's particularly problematical in Scotland. But it seems to be less of a problem now than it was 10 or 15 years ago.
Okay. So for the future, how important is sustainable food production?
Well, I think it's key. We've got declining resources. Everybody goes on about peak oil, but we've also got peak phosphorus. So within 30 years, we could be running out of the amount of phosphate that we need to grow crops successfully. Phosphate's one of these nutrients that's difficult. It's poorly soluble in water, so you always have the tendency to put too much on.
Yeah.
So there's an example of a nutrient that's quite important for root growth, well, very important for root growth, that we might be running out of. As well as that, we can't keep over applying fertilizers like nitrogen to areas. We have to apply it at the right time, at the right amount for the crop to take it up in an efficient way. So that's all part of the sustainability agenda, and a very important one. And obviously the energy requirements. We can't have a situation where we're dependent on fossil fuels going into the future, and we need alternatives that can provide a greener form of energy.
So with hydroponics, aquaponics and vertical growing, how does that change the industry for sustainable food?
Well, there's been a great deal of interest in hydroponics over the last 5 to 6 years. I guess with the change in energy costs, that has been somewhat blunted to some extent. But I see much of our... There's great potential for using hydroponics for our off-season production. Obviously, we can't grow crops all the year round.
Yeah.
We can't do it. Out in the field, there's a break. And many of our crops come from places like North Africa over during that period, because it's still warm there, they can still grow crops. And they've also got cheap energy because the sun shines there much more than it does here. So I think there's some of the sustainable solutions that we're developing could be used elsewhere to improve the sustainability of the produce that we eat right throughout the whole year, not only in those parts that are grown where we grow things that are eaten, that are produced in the UK, but also things that are grown outside the UK that come into the UK. It's a whole food balance that we want to change. So having food that's produced very efficiently and sustainably in the UK is blunted somewhat if we then import a lot of stuff that's not sustainably produced and produces a lot of waste and stuff like that. So that would seem to be the whole part of the production chain and the economy that needs to be tackled.
So would we need hundreds of acres of land to build hydroponic greenhouses?
No, I don't think so. I think that the fact that you can have vertical production means that you can reduce the amount of land that you need. You can also, if the energy is cheap enough, produce it in warehouses, so you actually don't need to grow on land at all. You can grow crops within warehouses or within facilities that don't actually use daylight. We've got good LED equipment, very efficient LED equipment. It's probably not quite there yet in terms of efficiency. It needs to go some extra way yet and to solve the problems that we have in terms of energy costs at the moment.
Yeah.
But the systems that we've got, the constraints that we've got at the moment may not last forever. Who knows? But I don't think that we will need to increase the amount of area that we're producing. We can produce crops very efficiently in a 3D setting.
Okay, and do you think the government will ever back it? As in, like, put a lot of money into it, millions? Or?
Well, I think this is what I was saying about having the need for a standalone Ministry of Food and Fisheries that can do this properly and can investigate the sustainability aspects, not only of UK production, but where food is coming from outside the UK, and also the where new technology is used. It's at the moment we really don't have a government department that will address that has much responsibility for it. It's either very blue skies thinking in terms of new technologies, or it's market forces that are selling things for the growers to use, and there's nothing in between that can cover how those new technologies are used, demonstrate how they're used, demonstrate how they can be profitable, and put some sort of plan together in terms of encouraging growers to bring these things into their production cycle.
Okay, so how many years do you think before it becomes effective? Would it be in the next 10 years?
Well, there's been many false dawns and things. I mean, one of the problems is that the technology is moving too fast. So there's no time to take up new technology before the next wave of new technology comes along. And that's been something that went back to the 1970s and 80s. If you think about, I've been around long enough to remember video recorders, and we look at the how that changed to CDs and how they're now obsolete, and everything changes very quickly. And I think the pace of change is coming very, very quickly. And that's actually quite disruptive in terms of implementing some of these technologies, in that no one has, everybody's waiting on the sidelines to see what the new technology is before they jump in.
Yeah.
So it can be a problem, and it can lead to a situation where nothing happens. So I wouldn't like to put a timescale on it, but I would say that maybe not 10 years, maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah. But do you think, with people not wanting to jump in, that the technology could be outdated by the time?
Exactly. That's the real problem, that it could be outdated. It's also start-up firms that are offering things. No one's clear whether those will be around for 5 years. We don't know what the long-term outcome will be on some of these technologies. We don't know really how efficiently they'll operate over the lifespan of the technology itself. All these questions still have to be answered, and there's no one to answer them, because we've got the companies that are selling the technologies, and of course they're saying yes, of course these can be applied, and we've got the food producers on the other side waiting to step in and not wanting to disrupt their own supply systems. So it's a very difficult one, a very challenging one, and this is where government needs to step in and be a bit more proactive rather than just sitting on the sidelines.
Pull their finger out.
Well, yes. I mean, there's an awful lot of good work that's been done on hedgerows and sustainable systems in agricultural land, but that only covers a fraction of the amount of land use that we've got. I mean, I know when you take into account forests and stuff like that and other wild areas, it comes to quite a substantial chunk of ground, land. But when you look at the amount of land that is used in production, it's quite a high amount. There are rules and regulations that that govern that, but nobody's actually looking at that in a strategic way to say, yes, well, if we adopt this, if we can do this, if we can do that, if we can look at this kind of production technology, that will improve things, or improve the environment, reduce the need for pesticides, those sorts of things. It's all being done in a haphazard way.
Yeah, not in the correct way.
Not in a kind of a strategic way.
So moving on from the government, you received a 2.2 million ERDF grant to help fund the Agritech Centre at Pershore College. Were you happy with the grant, and how useful was it?
I was very happy with the grant, but unfortunately it was affected by COVID. We got the grant in 2018-19. The grant was just about getting going when all things stopped on it.
Yeah.
In 2020 and 2021, it really didn't get going again until it ended in 2022. As 4 years. We achieved a number of things in it. We were able to do technology demonstrations. We had a lot of outreach seminars, things like that. But again, that COVID killed the in-person seminar, which was really quite bad. And we were doing these online seminars, which are okay, but they're not the same. But we managed to finish up the grant with an in-person seminar in May. I think it was 2022. Maybe it was 2021. I can't remember now. But we did finish up on online, and we launched some new sustainable products, 3D walls and things like that. So there was a lot of technology that was introduced through that grant into the growers, mainly the Vale of Evesham, because our centre is close to the Vale of Evesham, which is the premier growing area in the UK for horticulture.
So, is it?
Well, I think it is, but then I'm biased.
Are you from there?
Well, not really. I'm not from there, but I'd say when you look at the mixture of horticulture that's there's apples.
Yeah.
There's a lot of glasshouse crops. There's also some vegetables. It's probably got a bigger mix of those elements than somewhere like Kent has, which is mainly fruit. All right, it's got apples, but it wouldn't have any vegetable crops very much. And when you look at Lincolnshire, it's mainly vegetables. And there are glasshouse crops and flower crops there, although those really don't count. And then Scotland's got its own kind of system. It's different challenges up there make it very difficult to compare. So I would say that of all the horticultural areas, I probably missed some of them out. I would say that the Vale of Evesham's probably got the right mix.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of flower crops there as well. A lot of people growing flowers too.
There's a few plant nurseries up
there. There's just a few.
Yeah. So that's probably the first time that Evesham would get number one on anything.
Well, I think what part of the problem is you've got to put your best foot forward. There's always difficulties and always negativity, but you've got to sing your praises. And this is something I don't think the horticultural industry do in a concerted way, which is what they should do. I know we got a lot of things going in asparagus. We've got some great asparagus. We've got some great horticultural field crops. There's lots of things going on in the Vale of Evesham, but we don't really celebrate it in a kind of concerted way that we should. Yeah. I mean, there are very important individuals like Bal Pada, for example, who's a great guy at bringing together the horticultural industry in the Vale of Evesham, and has done a lot of good work and a lot of good charity work, and can promote the industry really well. But we need a lot more. We need a lot more of that. It's still a little bit isolated. Yeah. We need to be singing our praises more.
So with Pershore College, you are the course leader for the Sustainable Horticulture and Agriculture Technology course. How did that course come about?
Well, I think I'm not the course leader. I think it's Dr. Anjana Patel who's the course leader.
That's me a bit
I'm
embarrassed.
involved in the research side of it, so my area is really research. But I do a lot of teaching on the course. I do that, and have been instrumental in helping put the course together.
I like the classes.
Yeah. So our classes, the course is actually very technologically orientated. We have 3 themes that go through it, which is well, it's actually 4 themes, but the main 3 themes are growing crops and the constraints on growing crops, and how crops grow and how new technologies can be used to grow crops. The second theme is an engineering theme, which is how you can use engineering to reduce the amount of labour or reduce problems in picking, improve control, different things. These are all engineering solutions. The programmable controller is at the heart of everything, and actually, programmable controllers are found in many areas that you wouldn't think they would occur in. So they're there right through the whole thing. So breaking down some of these aspects are really important in the course. The third theme is really about sort of diagnostics. After all, we lose about 25% of crops to pests and diseases. So if we can detect problems early, we can solve those problems before we lose a lot of the production. Waste is a big problem in horticulture. There's so much of it. So we want to try and reduce that, and trying to reduce the amount of losses that we get from insects or fungi is definitely part of the issue. We also have other things like business systems, where some of the aspects of how we can tailor production systems to improve business, and we do modules on urban horticulture as well, where we're growing things in a specialized environment. So it is very technologically focused. We have lab-based modules, we have growing systems, hydroponics, vertical farm-based systems. We have surveying systems, which is another major area where we use drones to survey crops, because
isn't that the module where you give us all our own drone?
well, I don't know about your own drone, but you certainly get to fly a drone and get information from that drone. I mean, drones are being used already in agronomy to reduce the amount, so you can fly over crops and see where the problems are occurring, rather than spend your time walking around the whole thing, because that's very time consuming, and it might not actually see bigger problems that are there. You might not see those because you need to be up in the air or have a wider perspective. So we've got drone-based surveying systems. We've got a spraying drone now that we can use as well. So that's coming for the future. Okay.
How important is it to keep up to date for the future, to keep the course up to date?
I think it's very important because the course is actually breaking down some of the problems, some of the black box nature of some problems in applying technology. If you understand what's behind the technology, then you can understand how to solve it if it goes wrong, or what to do, how to apply it, or what you can do with the information. And these are all aspects of applying technology, applying new technologies in horticulture and agriculture, and that from that you will gain perspectives that will mean that you can know what's going on, apply the right concentration of fertilizer to the right area instead of spraying it over the whole field. That's going to reduce your inputs and the costs. We try and integrate agricultural and horticultural databases into our modules as well, because that enables people to look at the results and ascertain whether things went right or whether things went wrong. In the past 30 years ago, whenever I was starting, most people didn't do that.
Yeah.
They just did the same thing every year rather than change it, because that's what they'd always known. You can't say that people had experience and they knew that that would work after a long period of time. They knew what was going to work for their area. But I think we're in a very advanced stage now where there's new entrants coming in the whole time. You don't have 30 years to get an experience of what to do.
Yeah.
You have to do it very quickly, and this is where technology can actually help in getting you to that point.
And it goes again to that out of date thing, whereas you can't wait 30 years to get ahead on it because it'll be out of date by the time.
Be out of date, and also you could be out of business.
So what does the future hold for horticulture and agriculture?
Well, I think the future is definitely bright for agriculture and horticulture in the UK. We have some of the best standards associated with our production in the world. Our produce is trusted, which is very important. Our produce is also not contaminated. It doesn't suffer from some of the constraints in other parts of the world where it's warmer and they've got different things affecting the crop. So I think we've got a platform to actually expand our horticulture and agricultural offering. Part of that might be to take a really good look at our costs and apply technologies that can help us reduce our costs. UK agriculture, horticulture is one of the most dynamic and innovative in the world. There's always new things coming in. Yeah. And with that kind of spirit, it means that that's part of the reason why the future is bright. We've got now new vineyards coming in. That's a new form of production that's coming to the UK. Those are being seen more and more. So it's not just one area, it's a wider area of different things and different approaches that will help make the UK one of the best areas for growing in the world. And it will help sustain the basis of agriculture and horticulture in the UK. Okay. Because my fervent hope is that it attracts young people into agriculture and horticulture. This is where we need some work to try and change the kind of perceptions that agriculture and horticulturalists have. And that actually, when you apply new technology and know how that technology works, that's a big, powerful sort of advert for getting away from the fact that, or the perceptions that agriculture and horticulture isn't quite a very nice place to work, or it's not very technologically advanced. So applying new technologies and using those new technologies in a profitable way, I think will change the perceptions of the industry. Hopefully that will attract new people in and younger people in, which is what we need, because the perpetual age of growers is always 60. When every 30 years ago they said that the age of growers was 60. That was the average age. So I always thought, well, maybe people take up horticulture when they're 60 or something like that. That's what they decide to go into. But I think it's one of these things that we need younger people into the growing environment and the industry, and that will help bring in new things. Most young people are very, very savvy in how they apply technologies.
So what does the future hold for you? What does the future hold for Professor Roy Kennedy?
Well, the future holds for me, I'm not really important, so it doesn't really hold. What I think the future for me is to really look and hopefully see this course taking off at WCUC, and seeing some of the technological advances that I've been involved in getting a wider uptake throughout the world. It's already happened. We've had that botrytis test that's been taken up in France and Australia. Yeah. They're using it now throughout France, where they're trying to detect botrytis in wine pressings. Some of the other technologies, some of the other systems that we've developed, whether it's club root detection, taken up. I know there are other people that are offering club root detection, looking at helping design systems that are sustainable and can help reduce costs and get better outcomes, like the light leaf spot situation in Scotland. But there are many others. We did work on onion downy mildew in the West Midlands. People don't know it, but the West Midlands supplies about 70-80% of the green onion crop in the UK during the growing season here. So it's a major crop. So there's plenty of other things. I mean, in terms of going back to my early days in Reading, at Reading University, where I was looking at controlling root rots, we discovered that if you elevated the root temperatures, you could control some of these root pathogens. Normally, when a root pathogen gets into a tomato plant, it causes a wilt. It destroys all the roots and it causes a wilt. So we found that by elevating the root temperatures to 24, it would avoid the pathogen couldn't actually infect, or it infected badly. And so if we allied that with a detection test for Phytophthora, and this is something that I would like to do with the Phytophthora tests that I've developed for potato, we looked at that in tomato crops, we could then see when we might need to do something in order to avoid the spread of the disease in the crop, or detect it early. Mind you, you would have to have the right cultivars, because tomato cultivars, it affects the whole balance. If the roots are at high temperature and the aerial part of the crop is at a different temperature, you can get sort of weird growth. But that's something that needs investigating, and I'm sure it could end up in a system that could be used. Whether root rots are still a big part of tomato production, I don't know. I'm not up to date on the system there, but there are definitely bits of technology that can be used in different ways, or can be taken from one system and applied somewhere else. These are all the things. These are all the challenges. Maybe that's the future for me.
Okay, I like the sound of it. Hopefully I'm there to come along for the ride.
Yeah, well, that'd be great. That would be absolutely fantastic.
What is your hope for the impact of agritech students on the industry?
Well, my hope is that we have our agritech students get jobs within the industry. I mean, many of them are very resourceful and very entrepreneurial to start off with, so there's no problem there. Many of them already work in the industry. But and it's something that I think is important. Everybody leaving our course should have a job. That has happened already. Everybody who's left our course ends up with a job, which is important. Mostly in the agri-tech industry, but also in conventional production, maybe, the way things are growing, the way things are normally grown without so much technology. But a lot of them actually end up in systems where they're actually working in agri-tech companies.
Okay. And Joe Brennan?
Yeah, well, I was very sorry. I mean, Joe Brennan was an agritech student of ours, and he died suddenly. And he was a career changer, so we didn't. We knew Joe as a great guy. He was one of these guys that was always willing to listen, and other students were there. He could provide support and information, and it was a great shock when we heard of his death.
Yeah. So he was a student that the other students would look up to.
Yeah, that's right. He was a career changer. He was a more mature student.
Yeah.
So it was just a great shock when we heard that he had actually died a few months ago.
Yeah. So last question before I let you out. We're going to Mars. We have colonised Mars. Roy, you are coming to Mars with us. You need to pack your bags. You get to take one fruit one flower and one vegetable. What do you take?
Yeah, well, I think this is a difficult one. There's probably one fruit, one flower, and one vegetable is not enough. It may be that I'm the vegetable, so that fulfills that part of it. So they always said that Wellesbourne was the National Vegetable Research Station. So when somebody went there or got a job there, they always said another vegetable goes to Wellesbourne.
Getting tested.
Yes. So that was their accolade for new people going to the station at Wellesbourne.
I like it.
So that's one thing. But I think I would go back, draw on my experience, and say that I would take a citrus. Now, that might be difficult because citrus seeds don't grow that well. Maybe rough lemon. Some rough lemon seeds, they grow quite well, and they do produce lemons. They're not what we'd say is the commercial lemon. They're a bit rougher and larger, but I would certainly give you a memory of a citrus and a lemon. So
remember, there will be other people up there as well.
Yeah.
Which have took stuff, so you could even swap and trade.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that would be the fruit. I would take that, and I think I would have to take a Brussels sprout.
Okay.
Because I wouldn't be happy if I didn't have a Brussels sprout to grow. I've done so much in Brussels sprouts over the years. It's been brassica of some description. I think Brussels sprouts would be the main one to take because I've just always been around Brussels sprouts. I've enjoyed being around Brussels sprouts. I remember being out in Hay-on-Wye cutting Brussels sprouts out of an experimental trial on Christmas Eve, and it was so wet that there was so much mud that the mud was coming over my Wellingtons.
No way.
And there was some old guys cutting that were doing work in the field at the same time, and I said to one of them to make a bit of conversation, I said, it's an unusual year, isn't it? And he said, every year's an unusual year.
Been in it too long then, haven't they?
Probably. Yeah. So I think the Brussels sprout would be the vegetable I'd take, and I think if I was taking a flower, I think it would be a toss up between a daffodil, because the UK has the best area for producing daffodils in the world, the best quality. And I've worked on daffodil diseases in Cornwall, Ramularia, which white mold. I've also worked on botrytis narcissicula on daffodils in Cornwall. So Cornwall's got the best production, and I like the daffodil. It's always been a great flower because it's a herald of spring. Yeah. And it reminds you of spring. But I think, to cauterize that, I think it would also bring a thistle.
Okay. Why a thistle?
Well, the Scotch thistles, because having been of Scotch heritage, it would remind me of home.
Okay. So you'll take weeds up there to take over Mars as well as the Earth, then? Yeah,
that would be a bad idea. That's happened so many times when people have taken things that weren't appropriate. But hey, I don't know. I mean, obviously I'd try to keep it in bounds and not let it escape.
Quarantine it.
Yeah, quarantine it. But it would remind me of home. I do like the... I don't think it counts as a flower, but it does have a lovely purple flower on it, which is very nice.
We could just cut the thistle leaves off and leave
the flower. You'd be all right then, once you remove that. So those are things that I would choose if I was going.
I like it. Roy, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to what the future lessons hold.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ross, for, as I said at the start, of inviting me on here. It's been a little bit cathartic for me. So, and also, crystal ball-y gazing. It's always nice to do that.
Yeah.
And I really hope and I'm sure that the advent of new systems and new technologies that and the use of those, we can really make the course really interesting and really relevant for the 21st century, which is what we need.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's up there.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Cheers then. Bye.
Bye-bye.